My name is Risa Shimoda. I'm Executive Director of the River Management Society, and welcome to the 2026 training series about wild and scenic rivers. This is the third that we have had in the series, and the first two are both posted on our website, the River Training Channel. So this is the third one. We've had these for several years now. And really excited to have Becca Price, who's sort of the back-end person, membership coordinator, and anything webinar communications related for RMS is here. And then we have someone else is coming in. We have two great speakers, Dave Cernicek, Walton River Manager, an expert both on having managed eligible and designated rivers for the Forest Service in Jackson, and Ryan Turner, who's river manager on the Lower Salmon, which is an eligible, suitable river. And they both are going to share background on the act and how managing eligible rivers is sometimes similar and sometimes different than managing designated rivers. So I'm going to hand it off to you guys, and you just tell me what where we're going to go. Here we go. Oh, first, if I don't think we have a huge group, but for sure, if you have questions, put it in the chat. It would be awesome if you could put in the chat your name, where you're from, who you work with, agency, non-agency, curious individual, what forest or what unit, and I think we'll go to we have a app request for questions, and if we have lots of them, we'll go to raising hands. Otherwise, we'll just pick people from the chat. So let's go here.
Great. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Just a quick overview what we're here to talk about. Obviously, managing eligible wild and scenic rivers. We'll start off just kind of some basic stuff of key definitions, what makes a river eligible, where the eligibility comes from. We'll cover the classifications, and then Dave will kind of dive deeper into how we manage the eligible rivers. So here's just some basic definitions of what we include in this topic: free-flowing, naturally flowing river, no major dams or channel modifications. And then we'll talk a lot about ORVs, and in this context, that is not off-road vehicles. It's outstanding, remarkable values, which can vary from river to river. Things like the scenic quality, the cultural significance, fish and wildlife is a big one, recreational opportunities, but depending on the river and the study, what the outstanding, remarkable values are unique to that specific river. The study river is a river undergoing an official wild and scenic river study. And then in that study, it does receive interim protection. And then suitability is the assessment of whether the river should be recommended for designation. And the basic eligibility criteria is kind of what those definitions were. Must be free flowing, must have at least one ORV. A lot of them have multiple ORVs, and there is no minimum size or length required for the river to be studied.
Where do eligible rivers come from? Each agency is charged under the Wild and Scenic Act to do studies, and so I'll talk more about where the study requests come from. But this is an inventory, provides basis for determining which river segments are eligible for inclusion in the national system. So they're kind of like Miss America's not official, they're just in the running. There is a difference between this and the suitable study, or the suitability study that comes after this, that some agencies do and don't do. Slide. Where do they come from? Three different places. One, Congress can request that we do a study of a certain amount of rivers, and congressional studies have a lot more protection, and but that's only for 3 years. But yeah, they can tell us that we have to do it. Realize there's different requirements for doing so. As I said before, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act requires that we do that in our agency planning process. And most agency units have already done these numerous times. Maybe we're currently on a new one on my forest that is 765 sections. It's went down to 198, and probably about 30 that we think are going to be actual eligible rivers once the study's done. And finally, mainly with like non-federal land rivers, the governor of the state can request that the Department of Interior study a river for inclusion in the national system. And doesn't happen very often in the West that I know of. I think that's where our partnership rivers come from that are in the East primarily, but it's a Park Service thing.
So when a river is deemed eligible for the study, there's three classifications that river falls into, again, at the time of the study. Those three are wild, scenic, and recreational. And that really is based on the development and access with that river and the adjacent lands. And Section 2B of the Wild and Scenic River Acts defines these three categories as, next slide. So wild, again, wild is mainly no development or alterations, right? There's segments of rivers that are free of impoundments, generally inaccessible, except for by, trail. Then as you increase in the level of development and accessibility, you drop to scenic, largely undeveloped, accessible in places by roads, and then the most developed category is the recreational section. Go ahead to the next slide. We'll keep talking about these a little bit. So there's the three, just for reference. But one thing to note that the classification of these, it shows the level of development, and they're not necessarily an ORV that it's placed on the river. They can be, but for example, just because it's a recreational classification doesn't mean that it's managed for recreation or that recreation is an ORV. It refers to the level of development and access. Same thing with scenic and wild. It can be an ORV, but just having that designation during the study does not automatically, categorize that in the big picture as how it's managed. Yeah. So the interim management direction, while it's being studied, covering again, the fleet has to have a free flowing condition, has to have at least one ORV. Most of them has more, and then it's labeled in that classification as wild, scenic, or recreational at the time of the study. Also, the interim protections, it's automatic quarter-mile protected corridor during the study. And the goal is to protect the free flow, the water quality, and whichever ORVs that were determined important until the suitability or designation is decided. And then project review. Any federally assisted project, like permits or licenses within the corridor that does trigger a review to ensure there's no construction or activity that can adversely affect any of those three things, free flow, water quality, or any of the ORVs. And it does apply to the rivers designated by Congress the rivers under congressional study and agency identified study rivers. And those last three bullets are just kind of which guides the agencies under this interim protection.
Big question, and what always comes up when you have eligible rivers is everybody likes to talk about Section 7 analysis and determinations under Section 7 of the Act. That is a very different thing, and it is not required for eligible rivers. It's required for designated rivers. It's generally a large analysis that has to go on when we have projects that occur below the ordinary high water mark on either side of the river, and whether it's private land or public land or anything else, highways. And we are charged with a much different, that standard there is to preserve and improve the conditions of the river as a result of that project happening. If it's a negative analysis and it's going to affect the status quo and not improve the river segment, that is something that the Section 7 denies the project, and that's it. Sometimes we ask people to go back and redesign their projects to something we can improve, but that's, Section 7 is a much beefier piece of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act that can absolutely positively shut things down. And there are also requirements above and below a section that is designated. Below is mainly to prevent dams from like backing up into the designated section, and above is to have things not come across our designation line that have detrimental effects to the river. So yeah, Section 7 does not apply when it comes to federal water resources project. A federal water resources project is, as I said, something that occurs below ordinary high water line. It has some type of federal nexus like funding or permits from the Corps, and affects our designated sections or above or below them. But eligibility does not absolutely positively shut down everything. We can't stop all projects from experience and time and grade. A lot of projects are missed. A lot of projects are allowed to happen that are detrimental to eligible rivers when politics are in play. And at that point, if we can't stop a project, what we do is mitigate. And I will cover some of the basic things based on what our Forest Service policy is. I'm not going to speak to other agencies' policies, but let's have another slide. What does the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act say? It says basically we consider all eligibles in all planning. So knowing where your eligibles are, that they exist, and where to find information about them is pretty key. A lot of agencies have lists on their sites. There's, I believe, at least Forest Service has an internal SharePoint site that has a lot of the listings of the eligibles. Otherwise, it's based on your unit, and it's got to occur somewhere in your office. Really important thing is to make people know that this list exists, that there are river values that we're protecting on these things, and that eligibility needs to be taken into the planning project and must be evaluated. If we're doing NEPA, eligibles have to be included, and one big thing is our preferred alternative cannot say that we're just going to blow off the eligibility values and we're just going to go forward, river be damned. There's different ways to evaluate and analyze the effects on our river values, the water quality, the free flow, and the outstanding or remarkable values. As I said, Section 7 is a good format to use. Might be too involved. I generally do what's in my agency, what's called a ORV review, where I just pull out all of those outstandingly remarkable values that are in the eligibility study and decision, and speak to those, analyze those. Is it going to have an effect? Is it not going to have an effect? But there's other ways to do it, not just my way. Next slide, please. Just to Ryan mentioned before, but types of projects that can involve eligible sections of river, construction, making things bigger, anything on river banks, roads, boat ramps. We, if we're going to give easements or right of ways to the utilities that are in our corridor, we need to look at those. Water, just, anything affecting water is major, especially hydropower. Communication towers isn't always thought of, but it can really be a visual scar on your scenic values. You have one. And disposal of lands. And next slide, please. So what are we protecting? Know that you have rivers and what sections are protected. As I said, find the list, find the documents. You can't protect rivers you don't know exist. There is an eligibility study. Find it. It goes with that section of river that somebody may see is eligible, and you don't know for sure. Find what those ORVs are in the study. They exist, and they need to be spoken to, as well as all of our river values. That study should also say, tangibly what those ORVs are. The Red Hills, the Gray Hills, the Lavender Hills of the Grovant River. Something that calls out that specific actual existing thing, whether mainly where it's in your river canyon, especially if it's lower area watermark. And that eligibility study should be, there should be standards, guidelines that you should be speaking to, especially those tangible ORVs. And one thing I'm not always good about, I don't know if other people are, your agencies all have wild and scenic policies and authorities for what must be done. I'm going to cover some that are specific to my agency, not yours, but you'll get the general drift. Is there a question here? Who would review the impact of these types of projects on non-federal lands? I believe that would be the Park Service. The Park Service usually I believe that might be a partnership river. And there is a lot of our rivers that are not on federal lands have kind of a quasi-federal management. The Park Service is in charge of them, but they usually designate like a board of directors type of setup. There's citizen boards that participate in that stuff. Ultimately, also your state would be a big authority there if it's state lands, most definitely. Okay, so moving on. As I said, I'm going through to some of these example interim measures that are actually in Forest Service policies. I didn't know about them for a decade. They actually exist. One of the biggest threats to our rivers is mining, minerals, that type of thing. Sellable minerals are basically common materials that like sand, gravel, stone, pumice, and cinder. Leasable minerals are federally owned commodities that are mined through a leasing system rather than claimed outright. And that's like your oil, gas, geothermal, and non-energy minerals like phosphate, sodium, potassium, sulfur, that type of things. Scalable minerals are widely occurring common natural materials used for construction, agriculture, and landscaping. Again, sand and gravel, decorative rock, those types of things, clay. But one thing to know about eligibles is it's not an automatic, shut down to whatever's proposed if it is going to have an impact on the river. And as I said before, politics plays a big thing in here. But yeah, we have different types of things. Leasable minerals, what we're looking at is, following the mining acts as we do for locatable, but you know, we can let the project go ahead and give necessary, give conditions that they must operate under to protect the values of the river corridor. And so, uh, yeah, it's eligible is great. You can protect rivers, and Brian and I will both talk about those, but it's not, we can't stop everything. Some things are going to mow you over. DOT projects are a big one. Um, Wild rivers obviously have the most protection. And let's go to the next slide. If you look at transportation, there's some things that are called out as an absolute no, like airfields in wild sections. Other things are called out as possible, but must be mitigated. Uh, Basically done in such a way that protects the values. Um, Interesting here in transportation is projects outside the corridor, like trail projects, must be compatible and fully protect river values. With utilities, things are discouraged and possible solutions are offered. But sometimes the river canyon can only hold so much. They're not going to put utility corridors or power lines at the top of the mountains and go down each valley alongside the river. They are going to have to go through somewhere, and sometimes you absolutely cannot say no. But you do your best to offer things that are conditions that will protect the river and help with the restoration of the impact that they bring into the river. One of the things I push for always, if I have to do it, is they are able to bore tunnels underneath the river from above the ordinary high water line, and that is a whole lot different than them blocking a river, digging trenches that are 5 feet deep, and doing massive damage, massive rips that are generally never the same again. So, always look at your technology. Currently, one thing I just focused on not too long ago because they want to bury the power lines on one of my rivers. There is a difference between transmission and distribution lines when it comes to electricity. Transmission are the big ones that hum and have the giant towers and right away and the mode right away, that type of stuff, and they're not terribly compatible with wild and scenic rivers. And those are transmission lines. FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory, what is it, FERC Commission. It oversees transmission lines, but not distribution lines, just so you know. And so let's see. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. Recreation is usually a lot of what our projects are. Wild allows minimum facilities, but prefers to have them out of the corridor. Wilderness portals are something that happens, and that's okay. When it comes to scenic rivers, we can have moderate sized facilities that harmonize and are screened from view. Recreational rivers, we can do bigger projects. The big hardened boat ramp with 50 parking places, that type of thing can happen and is not prevented given the proximity to the river, trying to screen it off, that type of thing. And we can have facilities that are right next to the river. Motorized travel on wilds, it's not compatible, but may be allowed in special circumstances. Not exactly sure what those special ones are. We notice things like the salmon has jet boats on it. Jet boats were on that river before there was a designation, and so they were allowed and cleared to be there through the legislation for those rivers. Yeah, we try and screen things, that type of stuff. On scenic and recreation rivers, motorized may be permitted, prohibited, or restricted to protect values. And those are very different things. Getting rid of motors if they already exist is a pretty brutal, ugly piece of combat you will take on, but it is possible. And let's see, next slide. Okay, just a little example here. This is a piece of the Hoback Wild and Scenic River now. If you look at the red arrow, that is a landslide area, and it's right below Highway 189, 191. And it's not an active landslide, but my Department of Transportation got real excited about it in the early 2000s and thought that'd be shorn up. There was a little bit of drift in slant in the highway as a result of land moving, but nothing huge. But they wanted to fix it with a very huge solution. So what we're looking at is that precipice there by the yellow arrow. They want to just cut that nub off and sort of chop it all up and shove it against that area by the red arrow, and not have problems with any more sliding. And that was horrendous, at least to me. And yeah, it was an eligible river, so not much to fight back with, but definitely brought eligibility into it and what we could allow and what we couldn't allow. YDOT sort of backed off that, and then they proposed taking a bridge over the river, sort of below the, moving the highway so it comes across the river and goes up the bench a couple miles, then comes back across the river. Another huge project, 2 big bridges, doing the massive cutoff of the precipice. We did issue a letter that I wrote to YDOT saying that this is an eligible river and this is not okay. It definitely slowed things down. I don't know if they had eventually lost the funding and gave up on it too, but in the meantime, the river was designated as wild and scenic, and that forgoes any of those 2 ideas or solutions ever occurring on the Hoback Wild and Scenic River, which I'm very happy about. Yeah, so next slide, I think it's Ryan's.
So this is one of the projects that we are currently facing on the lower Salmon. On the left is a fall Chinook acclimation facility that is currently below the designated wild section in Hell's Canyon. And they've got the fall Chinook returns. The numbers are adequate enough on the snakes, so their interests, this is Fish and Wildlife and the local tribe, they are interested in relocating this acclimation facility over to the Salmon River to get similar returns and increase the fall Chinook fish population on the Salmon River. When the tribe and the Fish and Game approached us, they initially wanted to place this facility on an eligible scenic section. So I manage the last 112 miles of the lower Salmon River, or of the Salmon River in Idaho, and the last 52 miles are scenic, or under the scenic classification for eligibility, and then that upper 60 miles is under the recreation classification. And they initially wanted to place this facility in that scenic classification section, where our ORVs in that section is fish habitat and fish population, which this would definitely enhance that ORV, but it's scenic, and the scenery is also an ORV or classified or determined in that section. So our office tried to find a better solution, and it's quite the development. As you can see, it's like 16 big tanks that are going to be there year round, probably for the next 20 or 30 years. But we did find a better location upriver in the recreation section, which allows for more development and more of a visual intrusion So on the right, that is what we call Russell Bar, and that's where we've decided to relocate this acclimation facility. In that lower picture, you can see that's Highway 95. There is a bridge right there within view. So there's already, quite a bit of visual intrusion. We are still considering all of the ORVs of that recreation section. So we will be planting trees and camouflaging the view shed as much as we can for those tanks. But it allowed for just a little bit larger development on the eligibility recreation section. They also need power lines to power all this, and we just felt that in the scenic section, it was not appropriate for the ORVs that we were trying to protect down there. So all said and done, we were able to accommodate this. And again, this is going to be great for the anglers. The idea is to get the fall Chinook population flourishing and the salmon with get better returns. But we also wanted to keep the ORVs protected as much as we can, depending on the classification what we're managing.
Can I go on?
Yeah. That's a great example, Ryan, and that's where things get tough sometimes. Is our ORV is probably healthy salmon, but we're proposing a industrial size facility to help with having healthy, happy salmon that can be caught. And so, they're saying very often we have conflicting issues there in many of these projects. That's a great solution, though. So we can get to questions that we're going to probably end it here. Big thing, if you're managing, if you're managing rivers, or you're working with rivers, or working on documents that have to do with rivers, know whether or not you have sections of river that are eligible. Know what those river values are in them. You need to find that eligibility report, because they will have more specifics on the standard and guidelines of how we're supposed to be managing them and what we're protecting specifically. Know your agency policy and the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. As I said before, there's stuff in our policies that is very much, a lot of it is very similar to the Wild and Scenic Act primarily, but there's kernels of knowledge that you may not know are there that solve your problem for you, instead of agonizing of how you're going to deal with the proposed project. It may say, don't do this project in your policies, and life is good. You don't have to spend years writing documents and arguing with people. Always get help if needed. There's a lot of people out there, including myself, Ryan. Give a call, or drop an email and ask a question. I asked a lot of questions before I knew what heads or tails of Wild and Scenic River Management, and I got a lot of really great help from a lot of great people. And sometimes you just hear about projects and go, I think that's an eligible river, and nobody has invited me to the meeting. I shall invite myself. And because rivers aren't protected if nobody knows about them or stands up for them. So thanks. Let's move to questions.
Yeah. This is how to get in contact, and we can provide this later also. But there are a bunch of questions, and you can go through what is. So thank you, Dave and Ryan, first.
We got a message from Matt, question from Matt.
Yeah.
How is private development considered on private lands for eligible rivers? Unfortunately, we have little influence on private lands with the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, especially below ordinary high water mark. A lot of my eligibles always tend to fall where there's projects upstream of one of my designated. And so I move it into section 7 by saying it's upstream rather than using its eligibility to involve myself. But when it comes to private development, your your county is the main folks who approve projects and set the zoning and that type of stuff. It's really, really important to work with your counties. Some folks have been able to get their counties to like have wild and scenic zoning, which have, like greater setbacks, that type of stuff. But your county has a lot of power, and you know, you do have to fall back on that for a lot of private land issues. But as I said, they have a lot of power. During a previous presidential administration, I had a lot of violations on the private land, and the Army during that time, the Army Corps was directed not to do heavy enforcement of violations, just to write permits after the fact. Unfortunately, I have a county that was really miffed about it, and they made the guy pull out his projects, take it all out and put the river back the way it was. Had the county not been there and in alignment with us, would have turned out much differently. But definitely work with your counties and realize you don't have a lot of influence. You can't say definitely can't happen, but you can write letters, you can write comments, and you can involve yourself.
Thanks, Dave. There's a bunch of, before we go to Steve and Natalie and others, and maybe even Miri have been talking about non-federal land rivers. But before we go to that, because can just open it up to have a conversation. But Matt had a question for Ryan first. Where would the water be sourced from sourced from for those proposed fish tanks? Would the tanks be discharged into the lower salmon?
Yeah, so they're going to have a water pump, and they got a water right to pump directly upstream from the site to fill the tanks. And once the salmon are at a certain size, they are going to release them right there at the acclimation site, with obviously the idea they go to the ocean, come back up to that salmon river in that same area to spawn and to increase the returns. But all of the water is coming from right there on the river and then being discharged back into the river.
Yeah. Thank you. So Steve asked how many, this is maybe an NRI question, how many wild eligible undesignated rivers are there?
I would definitely say in the hundreds, Steve. There's, I believe we have at least 40 around 40 on the national forest that I work on. We do lose eligible rivers occasionally when we do new eligibility studies. Some places will take things off the list if they don't think it's eligible anymore because maybe they let a bad project happen. But yeah, there's quite a few out there, and it's hard to find. They're in scattered places. I believe the Park Service actually has, their NRI rivers, nationwide rivers inventory, which is similar to eligible, and NRI sections are in the Forest Service. We just generally think of as eligible. The one thing that decreases our numbers is after a eligibility study, at some point, very often, depending on agency, is we do a suitability study. So we take all those eligible rivers and we decide, which ones are going to be that are special enough to be suitable and reported to Congress as suitable rivers. We do report our eligible rivers as well, but suitability, is where a lot of our rivers drop out, and it may be for all sorts of different reasons, and it can be very political. Grazing is a big thing that often comes up in those. But so, if something is not found suitable and a suitable study is done, those eligibles generally lose their protection. Nice part about eligibles, and at least on my forest, we're just doing an eligibility study as required by doing a new forest plan. We have to do the study, we have to come up with a list, but we're not doing suitability right away. So as long as the river remains eligible, it still has those protections that an eligible river has. And that can be decades long protection. And very often now, a lot of our designations with wild and scenic rivers are actually, they're not reviewed as eligible or suitable. They're, um, you know, Congress works with groups from the outside and comes up with a list and designates them regardless of their status. That's that's a good thing usually also. But yeah, I the research could be done. Definitely look at the Park Service Wild and Scenic Rivers pages, and they do have a quantity that you can look at.
So I'm going to mention two questions and then I'll open it up a little bit to the discussion that Steve started on the yacht. Who would review the impact of these type projects? I'm not exactly sure on non-federal lands. The yacht is on state and private land. Matt
Yeah,
Terry, how is private
I
development?
answered that one already, I think.
Okay.
Hopefully it was good enough. Ask more,
And
Matt, if I didn't.
then Matt, how is private development considered on private land? Sort of similar.
Yeah,
Yeah.
answer that one.
Okay.
And
So
for him to
yeah, go ahead.
restrictions on water rights permits granted on eligible or wild and scenic rivers. Um, I don't know that there's any restrictions on the state issuing water rights. Uh, with designated wild and scenic rivers, we establish a federal water right, which is different than state. And we also have to um, quantify that we're directed by the act to quantify how much water is necessary in that river to protect our river values, our outstanding river values, free flowing water quality. And that's something we study and we come up with a number on. At that point, we work with the state. Very often it's called adjudication. Very often, sometimes it ends up in court, sometimes it doesn't. But we do register with the state for those flows as a extremely junior water rights holder. We come behind everybody else on the list already, but we do establish that right with the state for our designated wild and scenic. Eligible, I don't know. I don't believe that there's any restrictions for eligibles. That would be my best answer. But, water rights are something that the state deals with. And wild and scenic rivers, we try very hard not to mess with anybody's water rights and private land rights. And, we have diversions that are on wild and scenic rivers. They were there before it was designated, so they may remain. And one of the hardest things for me to swallow is that, the act allows them to maintain that water right. So if they do want to come out with a bulldozer and fix up their weir that collects the water, that type of thing, that's something I really can't jump in there as a Fed about and say you can't do that. They are allowed to maintain their water rights. And so that can be horrifying in some situations. Usually it's not, but yeah, there can be major movement of your riverbanks for diversions that are allowed and legal with the state for water rights. Well, that's enough.
David.
And I guess in reference to that fish acclimation facility, the lower salmon flows pretty large, and the time that they're going to be doing this is middle of April into early June, and that's our high water season where we get flows from 40,000 to sometimes over 80,000 CFS, and the CFS that they're taking out for these fish is fairly small compared to how much water is coming down, and all of that water is then being returned back into the river with the fish. So it's just kind of a temporary taking for 6 to 8 weeks before it goes back into the river. So that that particular water right was pretty negligible to allow that fish acclimation facility to operate.
Mary, on your question about the NRI, it was updated last year. It's supposed to be updated whenever there's an update. Prior to last year, it hadn't been updated for decades.
Okay. Well, our problem is a specific problem, and I've actually had a conversation with National Park Service about it. The 44 river miles that are showing up on the map for the Mayaka River, it's very unclear why they're showing up on the map. So it's kind of like a segment that was never it was never studied. The source is from 1982, which was before the first study that the Mayaka had. There were 12 miles that were found eligible and suitable, but they are not on that map. And our current study update, there was no trigger for that study. So, per National Park Service, nothing is going to get updated until the river is actually designated.
Can you call them on what is there that's inaccurate?
I had a conversation, and
all right.
There were a lot of raised eyebrows. So,
well, for sure, if they were working on what was true in 82 and count the number of questions, changes, or whatever that might have happened between them and now. That's the
honestly, error, right? It could have been a coding error for all we know.
Right. Yeah. So if you hear of any other inaccuracy, I would say that just contact them and see if there's something that they can help you figure out why it is or fix it.
Yeah.
Because now they do have someone there who is able to do that.
I mean, honestly, Risa, it was more about very relevant to the conversation that we're having today. If we are on the map, there's obviously ramifications for protecting the river right now. But the answer was, yeah, this is not accurate. So I can't use this as any justification for anything. So that, just choosing our battles right now.
Right. So Steve, you wanted after, because you brought up the yacht, are there unanswered questions? Because you had a bunch of questions instead of going through all of them.
Well, thank you, Risa. No, I got a lot of my questions answered. Great, thank you very much. And meeting Natalie on here, I hope that's the right person. Is who should I be partnering with? Because the state is pretty much none of the people who were here when it was designated state wild or when the relationship was with the Park Service when it was studied are here anymore. And I don't think they even know that they have a responsibility under the the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act to maintain it or manage it in a way that doesn't make it eligible anymore. Because it seems like some of the things they're doing are or allowing are shifting it towards a scenic eligibility, not a wild eligibility. So I guess I who would I reach out to? I reached out to Natalie on here, which was great, but is that the right person to get a partner that would, have a conversation with the state or have a partnership with the state to make sure that they're staying in line with these requirements?
I think somebody tell me if I'm wrong, but if you're talking about the Forest Service property, that's one thing. If the eligible segment is in Forest Service land, if it's in private land, that's different. If you're thinking about trying to develop a partnership wild and scenic segment, that's a partnership wild and scenic river thing. Complaining to the state of Maryland would be rough. I've seen the map that has all the Maryland scenic rivers, and none are being currently protected under that state designation.
Yeah, well, this one is, it was studied in 79, excuse me, that's wild eligible. The state didn't want the feds here, so they created a program and they designated it state wild. But it sounds like from this conversation and great presentation that there are still responsibilities to keep it eligible under the wild eligible federal program. Most of it is state land now. So I'm looking for somebody, particularly, I guess, with the Park Service, sounds like, that would, maybe come and help them understand what their responsibilities are.
Maybe Natalie can help. So I misunderstood your question, because if you're trying to have past responsibility restored, even though the land ownership has changed, it's pretty challenging not to develop a partnership with the river.
We would actually, the community would like, many of the people in the community would like this to be designated, but it's, we don't have the support of the governor or the local, state parks or local county government. So just this exact presentation of what are the responsibilities as a state agency or as a county to maintain this as wild eligible.
That's very state by state. but yeah, so
Yeah,
maybe Natalie can help you.
definitely outside pressure. Sometimes can make miracles happen, but it's hard with an administration that isn't necessarily in tune with past or want to keep a project going.
Yeah. If it's in Maryland, if you're talking Maryland, not Pennsylvania, Congresswoman Delaney is all about the river. She's very aware of people recreating on the what that's what.
I don't know who's in charge of that area for Park Service River and Trails Conservation, but I do know that they've eliminated a lot of positions as well.
Yeah, well, Natalie, you want to just describe what your territory is or your role? If you're still here.
It looked like she had to sign off, so, but
Oh,
I gave her my contact information.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think she's either new to the Park Service or new to this role, because I think it might have been. Yeah. So maybe there's some hope there, Steve.
Uh,
Well, it's any other questions?
I think there was one. I was looking around.
Yeah.
When we had not.
If you
No, recent changes to NEPA that affect eligible rivers. Michelle. Ryan, you got a great answer to this.
I don't. There could be. I haven't looked into that recently. If there's been recent changes, but not that I am aware of.
Yeah, for the Forest Service, USDA does have other agencies that are dealing with eligible rivers as well when it comes to farm subsidies and grant management and that type of stuff. Things have changed a lot with NEPA. And you're correct that we do have a lot more categorical exclusions that we can tap into now to expedite a project approval or denial. And they're always, every day there's a few that are in, that are out, that type of stuff. It's changing very quickly. We are, generally in my office, unless it's something really big, we are dealing with categorical exclusions when it comes to eligible rivers that are on federal property.
What's an example? What's an example?
NEPA, like a new bridge, a bridge replacement. Let's see what else. Lots of times people have problems with erosion. They want to do a stream bank project to improve that. I'll be truthful with you. I don't hear a lot about eligible projects because I haven't spread the gospel enough to people on my forest that you need to pay attention to this stuff. And that can be tough for people to, one, realize they have an eligible, that it has some type of protection and we need to do the paperwork. And two, there sometimes is people that don't want to do, think the whole wild and scenic thing is going to just make their project harder to do, so they just do it. And that's also hard. Gravel pits come up quite a bit when they're near the river and they're on the forest. With NEPA, it's at least my feeling is that we're, just hold on to your pants and see where it goes. Next day, there's definitely a lot less NEPA requirements, and the length of our NEPA documents is limited now. I believe the environmental impact statement is limited to 120 pages, supposedly. Don't quote me on that. But basically what what a lot of us are doing is go with what you know until someone tells you different.
Well, Steve, why don't you ask your bridge replacement question?
Yeah, thank you. I don't want to take everybody's time, but so there's a bridge that's been here since 1960 on the wild eligible section, and the county wants to replace the bridge. but instead of replacing it in its existing footprint, they're moving it 100 feet downstream. They'll be clear cutting. I don't know. There's a quarter acre or quarter mile has something to do with this for protections, but they want to clear cut an area of old growth forest, uh, blast rock formations and cliffs on the banks of the river, change the river banks. It's a bridge replacement, but it's not in the same place. Is that something that could be reviewed? They're pushing for a NEPA CE expedited to sort of get this through. So I guess that's my question: is there anything I could do? Or is this a place where the Park Service could
Are we
review the
doing,
project?
is this federal land or non-federal land?
This is state land.
State land. Uh, they may be taking federal money. Check into that.
Yes, they are.
Bridges do get, very often bridges, when they're building a new one, they build it right next to the old one. And, encouraging people to stay in that footprint is, really a good thing to do. The other big thing is getting people, really pushing that there's less paperwork challenges, uh, damage, whatever, if they want to replace with a bridge that spans the river instead of having pillars. Um, it's a definite positive for wild and scenic rivers to have impoundments taken out of them and not replaced. And I've usually been very successful in getting people to go that way just so they don't have to deal with me. Um, but it's a big bonus if you can get the span. I would try and work with Park Service, see if there is something they can do. Not being federal property, it's difficult, and you're probably limited to comments and getting other organizations stirred up. Closer review of state regulations, that type of thing, and water quality. Sometimes give you a few cards to play, but that's a difficult one. And remember eligible sections, if they're found not suitable, really don't have protection. And but all this stuff generally revolves around the Park Service. It's not parks per themselves, but it's a branch that when I worked for it was River and Trails Conservation Assistance Program, and it's out of the Washington office, but they do have representatives in different regions throughout the country, and maybe talking to one of them will bring you better information than I'm having now.
Thank you both.
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna just finish these. I know we have one more question. Thank you for attending today. I'm gonna end the recording right now.